because all you have to do is sign up for an airdrop.
Yeah, give them some money.
Exactly. What's hard is once those people have the airdrop to actually get them to not dump.
Very sensitive subject for like some of these Web3 natives.
Where do you deploy?
Who are building on Camp.
Welcome to EigenLayer Unlocked, an interactive educational journey through the EigenLayer ecosystem created by technical founders and builders for the entire crypto community. A special thank you to our partners, AltLayer, Polymer, Authentic, Skate, and Lagrange for helping to make this happen. Our goal is to raise the collective knowledge of the EigenLayer AVS ecosystem and unpack the technical designs of the top teams in space. Welcome to EigenLayer Unlocked. Welcome to the roll-up. Nirav, Gajesh, Vyas, good to see you guys back. I am absolutely jet-lagged. Yeah.
Been a long 17-hour flight for I think most of us over here, but got off the plane ready to do the roll-up. That's the way it works.
Dude, it was 4-hour turnaround for me. I was on the plane 4 hours ago.
Oh my days.
Yeah.
That was me and Shriram last year.
Yeah.
And like it was rough.
But you guys learned. You got to come a couple
that's why I got
days
here.
in advance.
That's why I got here a day early yesterday.
Yeah.
My plan was to come early, but United had other plans for me, so I ended up landing last night later to say the
Low-key,
least.
we were supposed to be on the same
flight.
flight.
Yeah, exactly. And then New York to SFO had other plans for me. So
Yeah, it's rough. Well, I think today we're talking about camp, which you have a full outfit on, which I need one of those hats bad.
I'll get you. I got you. We'll make sure we send one over to the roll-up over here.
Absolutely. I might be wearing that
one
on stage
podcast
tomorrow night.
equals one camp hat over there. It's the ratio we got over there.
We got to give one to Robbie too, though.
Yeah, we'll get one to Robbie for
For
sure.
sure. Yeah. Maybe you could tell, I think this is your first time on, so for our audience, what is camp? Who are you, sir? And why are you building camp?
Yeah, super great questions. And thanks, Andy, for having me. Excited to be on this with the Eigen guys as well. Quick background on me, Nirav, based in New York, as is our entire growth team. Camp is a social data layer, ultimately. Our idea was pretty simple. It's if you look at the way that most Web 2 apps were built, it's largely using this combination of data, identity, gathering user feedback, iterating on that, and then really building out over the course of 6 to 10 years a really strong product like Instagram or TikTok. When we look at Web3 development cycles, the biggest problem to date has always been, let's build a community, let's ship an MVP, let's launch a token, and then what ends up happening is the community ends up just dipping to the next project because the opportunity cost of sticking around is too high when you could airdrop farm or sort of earn yield anywhere else. And so ultimately what we're doing at Camp is we aggregate online social data from the largest Web2 social and streaming platforms and then put it on chain in the most verifiable and accurate way possible with the goal of A, letting users actually monetize their online identities, and B, giving teams the opportunity to actually deliver more personalized experiences with the goals of finding product market fit. I think the reason why we're so excited about this idea is if you spend like more than 20 minutes on crypto Twitter today, I would say 80% of the tweets are about how there's no apps that are actually relevant. Most of this is just infrastructure that has no real use cases. And a result of that is because no apps are actually interesting. And so we think Camp is sort of that missing link in order to create actually compelling apps, both social, consumer, entertainment, that people actually want to engage with.
Wow, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, sorry. I can slim it down if you need me to, but all you need to know is enabling the next generation of users to come online with good applications.
We can get right into it if you don't mind me going like a little spicy, right? You mentioned that you want to essentially bring in Web 2 data on chain, and this is something that like is often a like very sensitive subject for like some of these Web 3 natives who are very hesitant about bridging their physical Web 2 identities with their potentially anonymous Web 3 identities, right?
Yeah.
And I know you guys have some strategies there about combating that, but maybe you want to touch on like who your real like user base is going to be and whether you're targeting these like traditional Web3 users or you're focused on this next generation of users that we're trying to bring on chain and like part of like increasing the overall adoption. Where do you see your guys' strategy in terms of like these two kind of major user groups today and like what you guys want to do in terms of making a change in the ecosystem?
Phenomenal question. So a couple things to hit on over here. Number one is Web3, as what I would call an industry, has a higher percentage or like proportion of people who care about being completely undoxed today than any other industry. And so keeping that in mind, there is 100% going to be a percentage of people who are never going to authenticate and share their data. And we're totally okay with that. But when you look at the existing Web3 population today or Web3 users today of what it could be, it's like a minute percentage, to say the very least. And the other thing that people don't realize is Web3 people fundamentally also have their data like mined on Twitter, which is the biggest the biggest crypto platform today. Everybody's already mining those sort of data today. In terms of how we're sort of looking to combat this, number one is it's becoming more and more clear that people are willing to do things that deliver A, some sort of economic benefit, or B, a better experience to what is the alternative today. And so what we're doing at Camp on sort of A is if you authenticate and share your data, we actually give you a percentage of like sequencer revenue share. So why that's important is you're getting a continuous stream of that as opposed to just sort of a continuous stream of revenue as opposed to like a one-time airdrop, which you're instantly going to dump. And the result of that is if you're actually authenticating and sharing your data, you're more incentivized to actually stay in the ecosystem because it ultimately leads to more revenue for you. And on sort of the second point, delivering a more personalized experience, one of the things that people hate is that the Web3 apps today all have a pretty one-size-fit-all experience. If me, Gudge, Vyas, and Andy were to download the same app, we'd all have the same discovery process, which sucks. The reason why people love Instagram, love Twitter, love TikTok is because the feeds are so personalized that within an hour, we can basically have what's targeting us directly. And so that's really what we're enabling when users actually authenticate to their Web2 data. We're basically curating those more personalized experiences as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think of is actually another team that's building on EigenLayer, which is Lagrange. They have this ZK coprocessor. Yep. It's a completely different technical concept, but the idea is you can enable experiences that allow for longer term retention. You can have these personalized experiences of, you've done this on chain, and you can build more customizable smart contracts. You can kind of do a lot. Talk to us about how, with this new primitive of bringing this Web 2 identity on to Web 3 on chain, what kind of use cases, apps, like what can I build with that perhaps I couldn't with what the standard is now?
Yeah, really good question. And first of all, we're super close to the Lagrange team. We actually use them on the ZK coprocessor. Obviously, the future is
I'm sure it makes sense to actually do a collaboration with them. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the ways that you can get Web 2 data on chain, if you're on Twitter, is like this. Everybody's shilling this concept of like ZK TLS, which is basically just using TLS Notary, which is a Web 2 concept, except running the proof with like a ZK proof instead of using like a third-party attestation. And obviously, at scale, ZK is like, as of right now, it's still very expensive. So Lagrange obviously brings down the cost for ZK coprocessing. But in terms of what you can do in Web using sort of Camp that you can't do elsewhere. So number one, the data that we're providing is user level data. So why that's important is if you look at like traditional oracles, it's all like macro. It's like, oh, this person has X many followers. That doesn't really matter. Using sort of Camp's data, you can say, oh, Nirav liked Arsenal on Twitter, and then for example there's a ton of betting markets teams that are building on top of Camp. They can feed me an Arsenal bet because I'm more likely to actually use that. So the idea of sort of targeted advertising becomes so much more interesting. I would say of all the teams building on Camp today, the broad buckets they fall under to can be categorized in sort of 3 to 4. Number one is do action X in Web 2 and receive benefit Y in Web 3. So that's your classic, like, let's say I'm using Blackbird because everybody loves Blackbird at the end of the day. I'm eating at Teresi with my wife, a fantastic Italian restaurant in Soho.
Congrats on the marriage.
I'm not actually married. I don't know why I said wife. I realized as soon as I said that, I was like, oh, wait, we're live. But, I post a photo of sort of tagging Teresi, then Blackbird can say, oh, wow, this person's not just a customer who used it, they're also a brand ambassador. And so I receive extra fly tokens, for example. So that's sort of the first bucket. The second is we see a lot of teams in like creator economy, just to name a couple, building on Camp, Rebel, Verse as well. Sort of the idea there being, hey, connect your Twitter, connect your TikTok. That way we can know what you like, and so we can feed you existing content that's already on our platform that you're more likely to actually interact with. As opposed to, the classic like Instagram case where if they don't have any data, then I would get a sort of advertisement for like women's dresses. I obviously don't have as much of an interest in women's dresses as I do in sort of, oh, like there's a Niners game, I might as well get tickets for that. So the idea of sort of delivering that more curated personal experience. And then I think the third one that's actually the most interesting to me is like, those two are what I call bootstrapping your initial user following. The third one that really matters is how do you keep users incentivized and engaged long-term? And that's almost like that retention-based marketing where it's sort of saying, hey, this guy's done X, Y, and Z in this. We noticed that he's done this more than the other things. So let's continue to shoot him that. And then also when you have that ecosystem, you can run that cross-promo and cross-monetization scheme that works to a T. And we've seen that happen in Web 2.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of breakthrough is the kind of initial acquisition, and then being able to continuously provide people with what they want based on what they're doing off chain and bringing that on chain and making that a reality, right? So
Yeah, user acquisition is easy in blockchain, right?
but is it though? Because everyone's struggling. I think they're like the L2s that are going to go and say, look, we're going to focus on growing top of funnel here instead of arguing about who's got the best tech. I think in a year it's going to be clear that, whoa, these guys are kind of dominating.
Yeah, so here's how I'd phrase it. Tech is always second to distribution in blockchain. I actually agree with you on that in terms of like, because tech gets commoditized in any industry over time, right? You look at like the way RASs have sort of evolved and whatnot. The reason why I said user acquisition is easy is it's really easy to get a ton of people to sign up because all you have to do is sign up for an airdrop.
Yeah, give them some money.
Exactly. Like, and tokens are sort of like the incentive that enables all that.
Right.
What's hard is once those people have the airdrop to actually get them to not dump.
And to care.
Yeah. So like the line that Vyas and I always joke about is, get rid of the whole airdrop farmers and turn them into ecosystem campers at the end of the day. And it's one of the reasons why we call it camp. But the real value is, can you have somebody who maintains their wallet activity for month over month? I'm not even talking year over year, but if you can do month over month, and the best way to do that is with this like sticky user data that actually enables user stat retention at the end of the day.
Give the people what they want.
Exactly. Experiences win. Like one of the reasons why Blast was super popular was because you could do things on the chain and it didn't break. And even though a lot of the games were sort of like traditional casino gambling style, they were still fun to play and people knew that they were getting some economic incentive about it. That's the biggest difference, is if you have things that work, people will use it.
So you've kind of briefly touched on a few different points about airdrop farming, ecosystem campers. We talk about this a lot. But there's this kind of meta problem to L2s to blockchains right now, which is like the Sybil problem.
100%.
Right? And so maybe you want to touch on like what you guys are thinking about in terms of how you think some of this, sticky user data can be used for Sybil resistance.
Yeah.
Right? And this is kind of one of the, prominent issues of how do we fairly distribute ecosystem rewards to, positive value adding members of the community versus those people who are just there for that initial acquisition phase, but then honestly contribute to the sell pressure of the airdrop itself at some point, right?
100%. And Gudge, before I answer, I know you were going to say something. Is that on the same subject?
Oh, no, it's just different.
Okay, different. So I'll answer his question first, but I think you're absolutely right. The idea of an airdrop makes total sense to me. It's reward users who contribute to the ecosystem. The problem is the actual like bar for what contributing to an ecosystem is like create a wallet.
One transaction.
It's one transaction, which is signing a transaction because everything's gasless and testnet anyways, right? Like it's fake money at the end of the day. So this gets pretty interesting in a few different ways. And this is something we spent a lot of time with the Eigen team on, around bringing sort of like economic security around this, as well as sort of the idea of how do we make sure these are real users at the end of the day? And like there's extremities to it. And I would say WorldCoin is the most extreme in terms of it is the most accurate to preserve like one individual's one person, because you have to go get your eyeball scanned and it's linked to your phone. So but the difference is the universality concept isn't there. Not everybody is going to be able to actually go out and sort of get the eyeball scanned at the end of the day. What we think we're doing is pretty interesting because number one, you actually have to log in with a social account. Now the flip side of this is like some guy could theoretically buy 1,000 Twitter accounts and then have 1,000 different like wallets associated with that. Sure, that's fine. But if they're going through the effort with that, kudos to them at the end of the day. The second thing what we can really do is we believe that a lot of the world is trending towards what I call like on-chain governance. And a large part of that relates to social reputation. And why that matters is then you can really say, hey, this person's participated in X many votes, this person's done X much for the ecosystem, and you're able to track all of that data because it usually comes from the Web 2 sources, i.e. Twitter, at the end of the day. Then you can sort of say, okay, let's sort of reward season 1 with everybody who's ever logged in, authenticated, and shared their data. Totally fine, totally reasonable. Season 2 airdrop. Let's say it's the people who are actually core contributors. They're constantly shilling the ecosystem. We see a lot of activity there. That makes total sense to me because over time, theoretically, airdrops should be for the people who contribute more and more. You start out wide and then you get more concentrated. And so why that matters for anti-Sybil is you're basically finding ways to actually reward your core contributors as opposed to people who are just like wash trading a ton of transactions in testnet.
Since I'm going to step back and ask her really, can you speed run into like who are building on camp?
Really good question. So a couple of things. I would say I'm obviously biased on this, but I think we have the most aggressive BD team in the world.
Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, like we're everywhere. We try and be everywhere as much as possible.
Shout out Charco.
Shout out Charco, shout out Drew, shout out Jaden. That's just the BD team. And then obviously community and marketing as well.
Shout out Prez.
Shout out Prez. I get more texts when like Prez drops a tweet than I do on my birthday saying, how did you find your content guy after all this? No, but all that's to say, we see the bulk of the teams building on top of us today. being in what I call like entertainment, consumer, social, and media. And I think that's largely because the data that we're bringing on chain is more conducive for what I call consumer apps. That's not to say that we haven't seen some interest on the DeFi teams using our data. There's a couple of teams that are doing some pretty interesting stuff. There's a team building on top of us where they want to basically turn, instead of trading like hashtag ticker signs, they want to trade hashtags. So instead of trading like Tia on a Binance, you could trade a tweet about Celestia. And we're basically providing the Twitter streaming feed for that so they can actually determine what the pricing should be on a bonded curve. We've seen a couple of teams try and use Twitter as an actual platform to create meme coins and whatnot. So there are a few DeFi teams building, but I would say the overwhelming majority are on like entertainment, creator economy, provable fandom is pretty big as well. And then just generally like music and gamified real world experiences are what I would say are the most popular 5.
Nice. And outside of these two amazing guys, why'd you choose to build on EigenDA?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. And it's not just sort of the EigenDA, we're also an AVS, because when you think about social data, longer term, the natural trend towards is like proof of humanity. And obviously you need the economic security of Ethereum to back up all the data. Like in the early days, you get your Twitter data leaked. Not the end of the world. Longer term, you get either like bank information leaked or you get any social security data leaked. Very, very, very big lawsuit waiting to happen. So it's one of the reasons why we really like Eigen, both on the economic security side as well as the DA side. On the DA side, I think it's quite obvious that they've built one of the most fast plus cheap products, and scalability is going to be extremely essential for this with the quantum of data that we're hoping to move. So that was sort of the first thing. I think the second thing is in terms of ecosystem support, Eigen has done a phenomenal job of putting all their teams front and center to make sure they're in positions to succeed. I won't like FUD any other ecosystems, but I think when you talk to other ecosystems, they consistently will tell you, hey, you know, you do this, we'll help you fundraise, we'll put you on some podcasts, we'll like get you on some panels, we'll introduce you to the team. The difference is Eigen does that at like the speed of lightning compared to everybody else, and they actually do it. So something that might take another team a month will take Eigen a day and a half. And I think that's a testament to the quality of the team that they've really built. And I think sort of the last thing is just when you look at the amount of teams.
Look at this guy.
I mean, I'm just shilling his bags over here. What do you want me to do? Gudge told me right before, he's like, yo.
He's cracking up right now.
He told me right before, he's like, yo, before I get on, he's like, make sure you pump up Eigen, okay? I got to prove out Eigen. I made it work well.
For the record, I did not say that.
No, it's only good Jay.
Yeah, I'm underage.
The Caleb. Whoa, dude. This is not that type of podcast. No, but I think all in all, it can be boiled down to like eco support, probably best product in the market. I think the other thing that Eigen has done a really good job of is knowing where the market is trending. So like first they obviously had restaking, and then they launched DA after that. And then now it's sort of like, okay, where's the market gonna trend? And you sort of trust these guys and the big brains at Eigen to actually figure out what's next on the market that's gonna matter. And I think that like approach to consistently innovating and building new products as opposed to just iterating on one product is what leads Eigen to sort of be the monster that it is today.
Beautiful. The other kind of big question outside of DA ends up being, where do you deploy? And I know that you guys are still kind of, thinking through that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
but where are we building this massive camp network?
That's a good question. No, I'm just kidding. As of today, we use Optimism, and I think the obvious reason for that is like when you think about Interop, Base is like the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room. And one of the things that we're experimenting with is also sort of like using our social data to power apps, not just built on Camp's mainnet, but on other mainnets as well. So we announced like a huge partnership with Movement. We're doing a couple of the big ones that are not yet public, but you'll know them pretty well, about basically taking those consumer apps, giving sort of Camp's data oracles and letting their smart contracts live on whatever chain they really pick at the end of the day. So one of the reasons why we really liked Optimism was just their approach to BD and whatnot. Having said that, we see a lot of these other big L2 ecosystems sort of emerging, ZK Sync, Arbitrum, those sort of being the two prominent ones. And then obviously Movement's having a lot of their teams be EVM compatible as well. So there's some conversations about moving around elsewhere as of right now as well.
Yeah, I mean, Treasure just moved to ZK Sync.
Treasure did.
Going to have Abstract. A podcast with Karel about that. I think, I put out a tweet that was saying like ZK Sync's giving 7-figure grants.
It's insane.
And people got pretty upset about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the ZK Sync number one is giving 7-figure grants, but it's not like here's $5 million, go crazy. It's like, hey, hit all these milestones.
Milestones, correct? Yeah.
But that's pretty standard across the ecosystem for the most part.
100%.
Yeah, but like I don't know. I don't think Arbitrum's giving out that.
The numbers are different.
The numbers
I just
are
mean
different.
more so the
like
milestone
style.
based.
Yeah, of course.
But I think the reason why people are upset is that if you look at like the 2022 cycles, like the big ecosystems like
Avalanche Rush.
Polygon.
Do you remember Avalanche's meme coin fund?
It was insane. It was crazy.
Yeah.
$100 million or something
Yeah.
for meme coins.
And
I
then
think.
Polkadot had A-Star, which was their like $100 million ecosystem fund as well.
Yeah.
Right?
And
So history doesn't trend well for these massive ecosystem funds, but
so what I will say is like one of the things was like, if you look at Solana, I'm a huge socialer, by the way, but like one of the things that Solana did everybody better than anybody else is like, even if they gave grants, it was all organic. Like they basically went to community, they sat in the Discord, like Gudge is probably a good person to talk about this from his super team days as well.
Yeah.
But they basically found builders who could ship, and then they basically just invested really heavily in them. When
Yeah.
you look at a lot of those like EVM scaling L2s, it was like, hey, yo, you're built here, here's $1 million, come over and build here. And the result of that is like, you're obviously not going to leave your community. So it's an extension. And then you have the classic like fragmented liquidity problem of both users and TVL.
Yeah.
And so what I think is interesting on like the ZK Sync thing that you mentioned is they're basically trying to get exclusive contracts, which I think is a better way to do it than trying to have like 2 different iterations of Camp, for example, if we were to build on ZK Sync, or like 2 different iterations of like Magic Eden on like
Yeah.
the existing plus whatnot. So I think that's slightly a more interesting way to approach it. And I think the other thing is like, investing in builders is massive. The question is just if it comes from your own foundation or your investor's foundation.
Yeah.
And like you're seeing a lot of that with the, like Bear's done a really good job of having the Build Bear teams raised from existing investors on their cap table. Like Movement's done a really good job of this as well. It sort of feels like ZK Sync in particular, because you mentioned it from the 7-figure standpoint, is like they're just basically bootstrapping that initial dollar quantum such that you can go out and build an MVP before going out to raise it at a later time.
yeah.
I mean, Gudge, this like would love to sort of hear like your OG super team when you were like 14 years old or whatever it was. Like, how do you sort of see that Solana supported like you folks and the early builders there?
Totally. I think Solana, like super team was the main goal was to, I think the main goal was to like bootstrap like third world countries. So like they started with India. They got like the biggest content creator in India, Tanmay Bhatt, to like shill his user base.
Shout out All India Bakchod.
Yeah, shout out all India Bakshod, yes. But India has done a great job into producing engineers, and what they basically did was put like instant grants. They were like 1K to 10K instant grants, like in 48 hours. You build an app and they approve it. Usually these were like public goods. So they did like bootstrap bunch of these developers, which are now at like really great, like founding engineer and like really great positions in the Solana space. And I think it would, this take is really hot, but I think Solana wouldn't have existed because of FTX and Superteam.
Yeah.
Because FTX
It's a good
sourced
take.
the money, and Superteam sourced devs and the non-tech community. Like non-tech is actually one of the things they started, which is unique. So they had content grants. So you write some piece, you get a content. There used to be contests. So I can go all day long, but I think they did amazing job like getting all this talent pool from.
So there's one thing I want to touch on there, which is like kind of a problem right now in our community in the Ethereum space, which I think a few of us have like kind of, talked this to a T. But there used to be this like vocal aggregation effect of like communities in Ethereum kind of hyping each other up.
Yep.
And right now, most of the time, these L2s, these projects in the Ethereum space are fighting for the same devs, the same users, the same dApps, the same players. Yep. And the problem is like the more we like lack internal coordination, the more we will start externally losing the battle to other ecosystems, which is where I think like Solana does a great job. And you mentioned that you guys are currently on OP for the interop, but potentially ZK, potentially other things. Is it possible that we see some sort of like bridge solution from Camp at some point where you effectively have this like bridge data layer that can work across the ZK, the OP, the ARB stacks, and kind of any team building on any stack can be able to leverage some of this, user social data layer?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the $10 billion question. And like, you could even boil this down from like a 10,000 foot overview of like, are L2s good for Ethereum long term? And then if you sort of take that a step further, it's like, does OP want to bridge with Arbitrum? That's like a separate question that you sort of need to philosophically answer. There's a certain amount of like tribalism that exists in blockchain. You have your OP like diehards, you have your Arbitrum diehards. Do they really want that sense of interop? And so I think from like the founding team's perspective at each of those ecosystems, they're sort of going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, do we want to put in standardized procedures to be able to actually do this? But I 100% agree. I think it's the biggest question today is like, users don't give a Are you allowed to swear on this podcast?
We don't care.
Okay, cool. Yeah, users don't give a fuck about any of this shit. Like, they actually like users don't give a shit what anything is built on top of. They just care about like how easy it is to do things. And so like everybody always says that, and they're like, oh yeah, all we need is like better like features and like better like actual UX. But nobody's actually doing anything about it because everybody's too busy trying to pump their own bags at the end of the day. And so like that's for what it's worth. The reason why people love Solana is like you have your Phantom wallet, which is used across all the Solana apps. There's never that much of a pain to actually go out and use different things for different specific like applications on Solana. It's all just very composable. And I think that's where Ethereum has to trend towards if it wants to sort of compete on a long-term basis as well.
And do you think Camp will be building something that is, you know, kind of that bridge composable layer across all these ecosystems?
Yeah, so we actually we're shipping a new feature right now where basically any EVM app or like chain can basically use our data layer. And there's going to be a lot that we're doing on that around like DIDs on how to basically make it such that the wallets are compatible with each other, because obviously like some apps use Magic Link, some apps use Privy, some apps use Capsule, like, and then a lot of apps use Wallet Connect because it's free. And so the key is going to be like, how do you maintain the feeds within each of those? And so the real exciting part for us is like powering the entire EVM when it comes to social data, as opposed to just sort of powering a specific sort of like ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming out, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you,
Think
folks.
about it at a time. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, appreciate that.